Welcome to my Arcanist tank build, where we delve into the mystical arts of tanking in the Elder Scrolls Online. Join us as we uncover the secrets of harnessing arcane power to protect and dominate the battlefield. Get ready to witness the unstoppable force of our Arcanist tank build in action. Why play an Arcanist tank? They have a lot of group utility, group benefits, group buffs, and enemy debuffs. Huge amounts of recovery, making them quite easy in terms of sustain. They've got really good survival with 2 heals and a massive damage shield. They've got many long duration abilities, which means it's quite easy to keep up their rotation, keep up your buffs and debuffs. And they are very easy to reach the resistance cap, and they have some really nice defensive benefits. Some of the downsides: many of the group benefits are things that overlap. So, for example, long duration minor brittle is something that the Arcanist possesses. This is something you can achieve with Frost Clench. Minor vulnerability is again another long duration skill. This can be obtained in multiple other ways, such as the Necromancer, the Warden. They have access to a skill that can provide this as well. The main unique group buff is tied to a taunt, forcing you to play as a main tank. So sometimes that's something that you might not have wanted, but you're forced into it if you want to obtain that unique group buff. Some of the potential useful skills scale with stamina, so they're not really useful for a tank without having sustain issues. So there are a couple of things there that might affect whether you play the Arcanist or not. Arcanists offer a large amount of group benefits. These include Runic Sunder with 2200 armor pen, Fate Woven Armor that gives AoE minor breach, Runic Defense provides group minor resolve, Rune of the Colourless Pool provides minor brittle and minor vulnerability, the Circumvented Fate passive gives group minor evasion, Arcanist Domain gives minor courage, minor fortitude, minor intellect and minor endurance, and then you've got the Vitalizing Glyphic Ultimate that gives a group heal, along with 200 weapon and spell damage. So a good number of reasons to play the Arcanist tank. So let's take a look at the build. So for this Arcanist tank build, I have chosen the Nord. One of the reasons for this is the increased resistances. It means that we can get to the resistance cap extremely easily. It also means when we combine that Runic Sunder with Tremor Scale with our really high resistances, it means we don't necessarily need to use gear sets that provide pen. We can just have an Arcanist. It's also really nice to have max stamina, increased ulti gain, and also the added max health and frost resistance. In terms of the race, there is a few different ones that you could play. Obviously, like I've mentioned already, it's very easy to get to the resistance cap. You could just use the resistance CP. You've got access to minor and major resolve, so you could choose something else if you wanted to go something more sustain based, but my preference is just going with the Nord. If we take a look at our stat sheet, I've got my attributes set with 15 Magicka, 34 into health, and 15 into stamina. You can customize these in any way that you like, but I've gone with this setup personally because of the jewelry and the food that I've chosen to use, but obviously you can make slight adjustments to work things out in your own kind of way. As you can see with this build, we've got a good amount of all 3 recoveries, as well as really high resistances, and here are the advanced stats for the character. For the consumables, I am using the Azarga's Red Frothguard drink. You could quite easily use Bewitched Sugar Skulls with this build as well, because you have already got good recoveries. You can switch a couple of things around to change. So you could change the jewelry and use Bewitched Sugar Skulls, for example. By using Harmony Jewelry as well, you want to have higher max stats, because you don't want to have too little of max stats, or else when you gain resources from your Harmony, you won't gain the full benefit. You can also use the Smoked Bear if you want to stack those recoveries even higher. That would work well for this build as well. For the potions, I'm using the Tri-Restoration potions to give me all recoveries and all resources back. You could use Minor Heroism potions, but I'm already going to be gaining Minor Heroism with my skill choice, and also a piece of gear that relates to that as well. So I'm not using Minor Heroism potions, but you could do if you wanted to adjust things a little bit there. My Mundus Stone is the Atronach for the increased Magicka recovery, and that's really important because we have got a lot of Magicka skills with this build. We're now going to take a look at the gear, and there's 2 different setups, well 3 in fact. We've got the ad pull setup for dungeons, the boss setup for dungeons, and then the adjustments that you can make in terms of a trial Arcanist tank. So we're going to look at all of those 3 different things. For ad pulls, Vatishran, Sword and Board, the Void Bash set is still as vital as it's ever been, because the Arcanist doesn't have a fast pull-in chain skill. It does have access to a skill that can pull enemies in, but this is going to be the fastest way to do so, and it's also the most sustainable way, because you're going to pull everything in with 1 button press, 1 skill, very cheap to cast, nice and easy. Not only that, if you get the perfected version, you get the increased max health. You also apply AoE major maim to enemies that get pulled in, so it's also a debuff, which makes it very useful because it will pull everything in and debuff it, meaning those enemies do less damage. The second gear set I'm going to be using is Powerful Assault, and for add pulls I use the Charge Staff. The enchant doesn't really matter. Powerful Assault, a really strong set. Max health, max stamina, weapon and spell damage, which isn't that useful, but then the 5-piece is going to give our group 307 weapon and spell damage for 15 seconds. This works quite nicely because on the Arcanist, the way we're setting it up, we need to get a major breach skill, so when we combine Caltrops on the back bar with the Powerful Assault set, we're able to offer this to our group. Now, because we're stacking our resistances really high, and we've also got Runic Sunder, we're going to be able to offer our group utility of increased armor pen, and we do that by combining Tremor Scale with that Runic Sunder to give a really high value. This allows our group to wear more medium armor pieces and push out more damage. So with Tremor Scale we get max stamina, and when you activate a taunt ability on an enemy, you cause a Dune Ripper to burst from the ground. It deals physical damage to all enemies within 4 meters, reduces their armor, and this scales based off your resistances. So it says 1924 there. If we buff up with our skills, when we look back at this now, it's going to be a 2797 enemy debuff. So it's going to reduce that armor by that much. Layer that with our Runic Sunder, which is another 2200. We're offering quite a good amount of group pen with just 2 pieces of gear used to do so. Our next piece of gear is Turning Tide. This is really good for dungeon content. So we're going to get max health, max stamina, max health again. When you block, you gain flowing water for 10 seconds. Causes your next bash attack to deal magic damage. 5 by 10 meter line. And it applies major vulnerability for 10 seconds. So this is a really nice buff, especially for dungeon content. It just gives great DPS for your group. Enemies are going to take 10% increased damage, and it's a really easy set to farm. You pick it up from normal dungeons, get it on the body pieces for this build. That's going to be really helpful. As I mentioned, this is my add pull setup, so on the one-hander I use defending just to kind of tick me over on those resistances, but you don't have to. You can use whatever trait you want on your one-hander for the add pull setup. So on this add pull setup we are using a charged ice staff. This is to cause AoE, minor maim and minor brittle when we combine it with the pulsar skills. So we want a charge staff for add pulls, and then we're going to switch it to a different setup for bosses. When we switch to our boss setup, I am using the Maelstrom Perfected Sword and Shield, the Rampaging Slash set. It's not amazing, but the reason I'm using this, I had a spare gear slot because Puncturing Remedy doesn't fit into this build because we're not using Pierce Armor. So it didn't work, and then when I looked at the other options, by having this we get additional recovery, which is a very minimal amount, but then we also gain, when we do low slash, our next fully charged heavy attack within 5 seconds restores 1904 magicka and stamina. So 2k resources from a heavy attack after we use heroic slash. You don't have to use this, you could use a different set if you wanted to, but with the way we set up this build, there's not as many options as you might have with a different class. When you do move on to boss fights, you want to be using an infused Crusher ice staff as well. That isn't as effective on add pulls because your enchant can only apply to one enemy, and you can't guarantee which enemy it's going to apply to in an add pull, whereas you can on a boss fight. So it is a reliable boss fight enchant and trait, so you definitely want to have that for that situation. For all of our gear, we are using tri-stat enchants because it gives the most overall max stats. The traits of our gear alternate. We've got reinforced, divines. I'm using some divines, I'm using some reinforced because I want to hit that resistance cap to buff my tremor scale, to reduce the damage that I'm taking. That works really well. Going full divines isn't essential with an Arcanist because we already have so much recovery that you can afford to lose a little bit to get a bit of extra damage reduction, a bit of extra safety, and buff up that tremor scale. And then on the jewelry, Harmony with tri-cost reduction. For me, Harmony has just been absolutely fantastic. In trial content, it works absolutely fantastic. In dungeon content, it works better with an organized group or with players who know kind of what they're doing. If you are in a group where people don't know what they're doing, then infused would be better. The tri-cost reduction I've gone with because I am using Powerful Assault, so I'm going to be using a stamina skill to proc that. I'm using Runic Sunder and Heroic Slash, so I'm reducing the cost of those things as well. Reducing the cost of my magical abilities because I have got some kind of semi-spammable skills that I want to be casting pretty frequently, sometimes to build up Crux, sometimes to cast damage shields, so I am going to be casting quite a lot. So I want to reduce the cost on that stuff, and I've already got a huge amount of recovery that I don't need to worry so much about stacking it even higher. But if you wanted to, if you're not going to be using Powerful Assault, you don't need to use tri-cost reduction. Instead, you could use magicka cost reduction. Or if you are somebody who doesn't cast a lot, but you want to keep up your resources really high, recovery does work very well also. Now, in terms of going into trial content, you have got a few different options. As I In a trial, you are most likely going to be a main tank with an Arcanist because of the group buff you provide is locked into that taunt, so you are going to most likely be the main tank. Now, when you use a monster set, it might be Tremor Scale, but other options include Archdruid, Nazare, or the mythic item Spalder of Ruin. On your gear in this build, we're using Powerful Assault and Turning Tide, but in terms of other options, might include Pearlescent Ward. You might use Saxhill Champion with Resonating Glyphic to provide another 200 weapon and spell damage to your group. You might use Crimson Oath if you're not going to be using Tremor Scale, although it seems a bit of a waste to use a 5-piece of gear when a 2-piece can pretty much cover you for what you need. For dungeon content, alternatives include Vestment of Olorim if you don't have a healer that's using a set that provides Major Courage, or Drake's Rush if you want to boost your ultimate. That's another really good option as well. Okay, now we'll move on to the skills for this Arcanist build. On our front bar, firstly, we've got Runic Sunder. This replaces Pierce Armor as your stamina front bar taunt. The good thing is it does have a bit of range to it as well, 22 meter range. And the reason for using this is because it's our unique group buff. It gives the group an extra 2,200 armor so it applies it to the enemy. The enemy loses 2,200 armor, so our group will do more damage. This works well in both trial situations and dungeons because it does mean that if you're in a trial situation, you might not need an Alkosh user, you might not need Crimson Oath, so you're able to use additional 5-piece gear options, and just by using an Arcanist that might be using this with Tremor Scale. You also get Minor Maim, which isn't that important because we get so many sources of this, and it will also generate some Crux, which is really helpful. Next, we're going to use Xena's Empowering Disc. This is a great skill, even for a tank. We're going to slot this on our front bar, and the reason we use this morph is because it's going to provide a wide range of group benefits. Minor Courage, replacing the core of Yolnacrin set. Minor Fortitude, Minor Intellect, and Minor Endurance, which increases both our recovery and our group's recovery. And we use this morph because these effects cling to your allies and you for up to 10 seconds after leaving the vortex. So your group will get 20 seconds of duration by standing in it, and then an additional 10 seconds afterwards. So there's no reason not to really use this. So even in trials where you have to move a lot, this is still going to be a really good skill because you're able to pop it down on the ground. People can step in it, they can stay in it, they can move out of it, they keep the buff for a long period of time. So it's going to be very reliable. So you just cast it down on the ground and your group are going to get the benefit. Now, it's not an absolutely huge area, but it's big enough to be able to provide this both in dungeon situations and trial situations to give a really nice group buff. The reason we use this on the front bar is because of this passive here, Intricate Rune Forms. Your status as Illuminatus reduces the cost and increases the strength of your damage shields by 10%. So we slot this on the front bar because that's going to buff our next skill, which is Impeverous Rune Ward. This is a really good skill, and it's a very reactive tank skill. So the way that you've got to use this is by trying to anticipate damage. So you get a damage shield for 1 second, and that's going to be a 31,275 damage shield for 1 second, and then an 18,764 shield for 5 seconds if the first shield persists. So as long as you don't use that 31k damage shield for that first second, you're then going to get an additional 18k shield for 5 seconds afterward. These scale off your max health, so if you do want to put all your points into max health, this shield will be even bigger, and it's just a really good skill. 3,100 magicka cost of using this, so it's a really big shield. The first time you take direct damage, the shield retaliates and does magic damage to the attacker, so it deals a little bit of damage back, and you consume Crux to heal yourself for 4117 health. This scales your max health as well, so this is per Crux. If you save up multiple Crux, this heal is going to be even bigger, and that is exactly how we're going to do this. So we cast this skill, as you can see, a damage shield that covers nearly our full health bar, and then it's almost a spammable skill for survival. You can keep casting it and it's going to really increase your survivability because it's going to prevent you taking damage in the first place. The secondary benefit to it is the fact that it does give you that heal, and the heal is based on Crux. The way that I've set this build up is that I am saving all of my Crux and I'm using this as my only Crux spender, and that's so I've got 2 healing options. As we move on to the next skill, this is basically one of our main heals, so we have to combine these 2 skills to heal. So Rune Guard of Still Waters is the option I go with. This is the better morph for dungeons because it gives an immobilization. So it's going to give minor resolve for 20 seconds, increasing your armor. So really easy and accessible minor resolve, which means we can be very reliant on it to get to the resistance cap. It also gives that to our group. Now, the only downside to that is the group is most likely going to have it already if you've got a healer, because Combat Prayer also provides minor resolve. This is more reliable because it's just in a radius rather than having to target on people directly. After 1 second of casting it, it immobilizes enemies within 7 meters for 3 seconds. Not the longest of durations on the immobilize, but it is a 360 degree 7 meter radius, which is very, very nice because you're going to be able to pull enemies in and immobilize them. It means that we've got this Magicka skill, it immobilizes, but it's got different layers to it. We also get minor protection from this skill for 20 seconds, reducing our damage by 5%. That's also really nice that we take reduced damage. And then it is our heal as well, so the first time you are damaged while below 50% health, the minor protection is consumed to heal you for 12,352 health, scales off your max health. So that's our max health heal. Now it doesn't seem very good because you've got to be under 50% and then you've got to take damage, which can be quite risky. And that's why we have to combine these two skills together. So we have this skill active at all times because it's giving us minor protection and minor resolve. It's going to immobilize enemies as well when we're in ad pulls, and it's going to automatically heal us when we're low on health. So if we go low on health, we don't have to cast a heal. This is automatically going to proc a heal, so long as this skill is active. Now, if you want to heal before you reach below 50%, you've got the option of consuming Crux to use Impeverous Rune Ward. So that is how we kind of balance the two things. This skill provides us with a huge shield combined with a heal, and then this provides us with all of the defensive benefits as well as the heal automatically when we get low on health. So the survivability for me has been really, really good. I've been in some really crazy situations where taking a ton of damage, but we're able to get through it even when enemies are enraged and all sorts of stuff, because this combination of skills just works incredibly well for survival. The next skill is kind of a flex slot. For ad pulls, Power Bash with Void Bash is essential. You can't use the Void Bash set without it, so we have to slot that. But in terms of trial situations and in terms of bosses, then obviously you would take this out. We are using the Maelstrom one-handed shield here, so obviously we have to use Heroic Slash, and Heroic Slash is also good for that minor heroism because, to be quite honest, the ultimate gain on this build isn't that great compared to things like the Necro, the Nightblade. There's very few kind of ultimate gain in perks, skills, and passives, so Heroic Slash can be quite useful to have in there. And then on the front bar, the ultimate I've gone with is Replenishing Barrier. The reason I've gone with this, for the increased Magicka recovery, and that comes from the Magicka Aid passive, which increases it by 10%. Now, you could also slot Gibbering Shield on your front bar. It's not a great skill to physically use in PvE situations, but this will buff up your Wellspring of the Abyss passive. Now, this will provide less Magicka recovery, but this passive gives you health, Magicka, and stamina recovery per ability that you've got slotted. So if you slot Gibbering Shield, you're going to lose a bit of Magicka recovery, but you are going to gain stamina and health recovery additionally to a little bit of Magicka recovery. So if you're just going to focus on Magicka recovery, Barrier is the better one because it will give more because it's a percentage-based thing. If you want to have overall more recovery of all three, then you'd slot Gibbering Shield. When we switch to the back bar, this is our ad pull setup. So we've got Pulsar, which is going to give minor mangle, reducing the max health of enemies. It's also going to proc minor brittle and minor maim. So we're getting a lot of additional benefits layered there on the enemy. We're also using Razor Caltrops. This is to proc Powerful Assault, give us Major Breach, but it's AoE Major Breach as well. It's going to snare enemies, so that's really helpful to slow them down. We don't have Pierce Armor, so we are quite reliant on getting this skill down on the ground to Major Breach enemies, because without that, we're going to be really, really under the pen cap. Blockade of Frost is to proc our enchant as well. It's to give us that damage shield. We get some minor breach if enemies are chilled and they are in the area. The next skill we've got is Crux Weaver Armor. And again, I like this morph better because we are able to get our Major Resolve. You don't really need to use Balance with an Arcanist because you've got so much Magicka recovery already. Having that fail-safe where you can kind of give up health to get Magicka back isn't needed, but obviously, if you're really struggling for your Magicka sustain, then you could do that. While the armor persists, taking damage applies minor breach. So as I mentioned already, this requires quite a lot to get that minor breach. So you have to put down blockade, we then have to chill the enemy with Pulsar, while they're stood inside the blockade to apply minor breach to enemies with Crux Weaver Armor. So combining the two things together should really push up the uptime, but we just need to have enemies taunted and use Crux Weaver Armor, and then when they hit us, it's going to apply minor breach to them in return. So really, really good, and this also generates Crux. The next skill, Rune of Uncanny Adoration. It might seem like a strange skill because the other morph for this skill is really, really good, but we are going to get minor vulnerability. This does mean we don't need to use the charged one-hander because we already get minor vulnerability, so we don't need to use a charged one-hander with the shock enchant like we would on other builds because we've already got this, and this is going to charm enemies. So as you can see, we don't have Silver Leash slotted, we don't have an unrelenting grip like the DK, we have this skill that charms the enemy, and this works surprisingly well. So when we use it, the enemy will just walk to us and follow us around for 8 seconds. So although there's not a taunt applied to this and it's not a chain, it does pull enemies in pretty fast. You can apply it to multiple enemies. It costs magicka, which is one of the big points. Ranged enemies such as archers and mages, which usually try to attack you from range, will walk and follow you around for those 8 seconds. So although it doesn't apply a taunt, it's kind of like a mini taunt, because it does give that 8 seconds where they will just hard focus onto you. In terms of like a boss fight, we would switch Pulsar to Frost Clench because the extra taunt's nice. The Major Maime's really nice. The guaranteed shield effects can be helpful, but it's not as essential because in a boss fight you would switch to the other morph of this skill, which is Rune of the Colourless Pool, and the reason for that is it's a 20-second minor vulnerability and minor brittle. You don't need to be using an ice staff to activate it, so it provides a really nice group buff because it's a reliable, high uptime skill. So when you're on a boss fight, obviously you don't need to charm. It doesn't work on elite enemies, so you wouldn't need to use a charm skill on a boss. You would want to use the other morph for the additional group benefits. When we look at our passives, for the Herald of the Tome skill line, obviously there's nothing here that is essential for tanking. They're all damage based, you don't need to take them. For skills that we could use, this skill here provides us with additional magicka and stamina if needed. So it also can generate Crux. If you are struggling for sustain with an Arcanist, you can use this skill because you activate it and then it will just run for 30 seconds. Now every time you use one of your class skills, it will give you additional resources back, which can be quite helpful if you are struggling for that sustain. Rune of Displacement, not a great skill. It seems like they've tried to make it for tanks, but it doesn't work as effectively as it seems. It's got a very small radius, 8 meters. It's got a 22 meter range, so you can stack enemies far away from where you're actually stood, which isn't that useful. I've tried to use it, I've tried to make use of it, but it is just better to use the Void Bash set than try to make use of this skill. In the Soldier of Apocrypha skill line, we've got some great passives here. So Aegis of the Unseen, you get increased armor. You've got Wellspring of the Abyss, as we mentioned already. For every skill you've got slotted on your bar, 129 recovery. So every single one of these skills has some kind of use. Now, if you wanted to, you could slot them all on one bar. If you really wanted to push up your recovery on one bar, I've kind of got them separated between the two different bars here. But as you can see, we've got some really high recovery. And when we then add on additional sustain from other sources, and we've got percentage modifiers in there, this is how we get such high recovery. Circumvented Fate, another group buff, minor evasion. So we're able to give that to our group, reducing AoE damage by 10%. There is some very kind of specific places where this is useful. In quite a lot of content it won't be, but in places where there is high AoE damage, and especially for your group, then obviously this is going to provide a nice little defensive buff. And then finally, when you consume Crux, you gain 4 ultimate once every 8 seconds, so an additional benefit to our ulti game. Now on the healer skill line, the annoying thing about the skills here is you've got things like Rune Mend, which cost is determined by the highest max resource. You always want your highest max resource to be stamina, so that means it's going to be a stamina costing skill. So that kind of puts Rune Mend out of there. Remedy Cascade and Chakram Shields all work based on the highest max resource, which means they're not that useful for a tank, because although some of these skills look like they could be quite good, Chakram Shields looks like a good skill, it's not going to be that useful for a tank because it's another stamina costing skill. You can't really afford to have too many stamina costing skills, because then you're going to have a real sustain problems. If you're not using Powerful Assault, if you're not using Caltrops, for example, then using this could be an option. A really good skill here, Resonating Glyphic. Now, you would probably need to use this with Sax Champion if you wanted to get the most benefit out of it, but it's an ultimate skill. You summon the Apocryphal Glyphic, which you and your allies can damage. You don't want to use the other one because you don't have any healing skills really that can heal it. The other morph requires you to heal it, and then it provides the buff to your group, whereas this one requires you to damage it. Now your group can AoE damage it, and then this is going to give 200 weapon and spell damage and heals you and your allies around it for up to 2253 health every 1 second in proportion to its health. So by damaging it, you increase its health, and then it provides this buff to your group. So that is something you can use. When we look at the passives, your Mastery of Weaving Fate and Abysmal Water increase your healing done by 3% for each active Crux. So this is going to be really helpful in a minute when I tell you about how I work the Crux here. The next passive, when you generate Crux, you restore magicka and stamina, so more sustain. So we've got quite a few different options for just gaining magicka or stamina and stamina back. So we don't have to really do a lot. We've got a lot of Crux generation, and we're just going to gain resources back when we do that. The next passive is just absolutely huge. We've already got like a lot of sustain from the tank skill line with that passive, and then we add this one on top of it as well, which gives an additional 18% magicka and stamina recovery. So we've stacked it up really high already. We've then got another 18% on top of that, which is just absolutely wild. And then the final passive, this is the reason why we slot this skill on the front bar, because you have to have a curative rune form ability slotted on the bar, and it'll benefit that bar. Because we've got our damage shield here, we slot this next to it. This is going to buff up our damage shield by 10%, which is absolutely huge. So for our basic rotation for this build, you obviously want to pre-buff with your armor buffs, and then you go into combat with your Runic Sunder. You place your skill, this skill, on the ground so that your group can get the benefits of it. If you use Heroic Slash with the Maelstrom one-handed shield, you want to follow it with a heavy attack. On your back bar, you have to keep up both your Frost Clench, you have to keep down Caltrops at 100% uptime, and your Blockade as well. You use your shield skill as and when you need it. Things like Runic Sunder will generate Crux every single time you cast it. So as you can see, the green floating icons there are Crux. Every time you cast it, you'll gain them, so it's really clear. And then you'll use them to get your big heal. So a 14k heal there when we use that damage shield. So we not only get a heal, but we get the additional protection of that. Ad pulls I usually lead in with a Frost Blockade to kind of instigate combat. Once combat is initiated, I throw down Caltrops. I then generally spin around the enemy and I hit my Void Bash to pull everything in from behind. And then that's when you start layering down all your other skills, spamming your Pulsar to get those debuffs applied to enemies. And if you have an enemy that's at range, you pull them in by using your Charm skill. Okay, so now we're going to look at Crux. Now, there are some of these skills here that the other morph would be useful. The way Crux works is you have Crux Earners and you have Crux Spenders. For a tank, there's not really too many beneficial situations for things that are Crux Spenders. I'm obviously playing it safe with my setup where I'm using something that will heal me when I spend Crux. But there are additional Crux Spenders that you can use. Now, if you look at Runic Sunder, that is going to generate Crux. Impeverous Rune Ward consumes Crux to heal you. So this is my only Crux Spender. So I'm banking all of my Crux to get a big heal. So it's 4359 health that it heals you for. But then every Crux adds another 4359 health on top of that heal. So with 3 Crux is the maximum you can stack up. And that is the heal that I'm going to get. I'm going to get a really big heal. Crux Weaver Armor. So I've gone with the Crux Weaver Armor here. That generates Crux as well once every 5 seconds. When you take damage. The other morph for this will spend Crux to get block mitigation, but the block mitigation is such a small amount that it doesn't really seem worthwhile to bank up your Crux to get an unreliable amount of block mitigation that you're going to have to like try and manage that. But then if you're also using this morph of Rune Ward, then it's going to be difficult because you're going to have 2 skills that are potentially spending it and not enough earning it. So you really have to focus on which skill do you want to earn and which skill do you want to spend. I really would suggest not having more than one spending skill because this is probably... Impeverous Rune Ward is going to be a skill you cast quite frequently. So if you do use the other morph and you go with the other morph of Fate Woven Armor, then that might be fine. But you don't want to use multiple spenders because it's going to be hard to rely on them. You're going to have a hard time keeping track of, okay, which one do I need to use? Those additional benefits are going to become unreliable or super low values because you're obviously spending 1 Crux on one skill, then 1 Crux on the next skill, rather than getting just one big benefit from one spender. Next, let's have a look at the champion points. Now, there's a few different things you can do with the champion points. I've slotted Duelist Rebuff, Enduring Resolve, Bulwark, and then we've also used Ironclad. You could use Unassailable, but it's less effective than the others, and it's even more less effective thanks to the minor evasion that we've got. So the way that this stacks up, it offers such little benefit that I don't find it worthwhile. But obviously in a situation where you know you're taking a huge AoE attack, then definitely slot it, but generally you don't need it. For the red CP, there is a wide variety of options you can go with here. Now, I've slotted Boundless Vitality. I've also slotted Shield Master and Bastion, and that's because I've got such huge recoveries. I've already got max resistances, but you could kind of adjust things around if you wanted to. The sake of 90 recovery, obviously it works out more than that with modifiers, but it's not really worth slotting this because you actually would get more benefit from the reduced cost here if you are casting your shield skill quite a lot, which may be the case depending on how good your group and your healer are. But I really like the fact that it buffs up your shield and reduces the cost. If you did slot Chakram Shield, that's also going to be impacted by this skill, which is really, really good also. When we look at other options, you could be slotting Celerity, and I do that for ad pulls. I adjust between Celerity and the next slottable, which is Bracing Anchor. Bracing Anchor slows you down, so I take that off for ad pulls so I can move quicker, and I slot Celerity. Another really good option would be Wardmaster. If you didn't want to take the reduced cost of the shield maybe, or you didn't want to get the bigger shield, you could go with Wardmaster because blocking and having the damage shield active reduces your damage by 10%. So it's another great option. There's so many different ways to work this. I'm obviously going to be adjusting things on a fight by fight basis. So depending on the kind of encounter that I'm facing, I am going to be adjusting my champion points. But I've got all these ready because I might need an extra 10% damage reduction. So I'll slot this if I'm in a really high damage situation. If I'm spamming my damage shield because it's giving me the most protection, then I'll use that more often, and I'll make sure I've got that Bastion. Things like that. So it really depends on the individual situation. But yeah, you want to be adjusting your champion points to accommodate that. So that was my Arcanist tank build. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I really hope you enjoy playing this in the next patch. I'm going to be converting over to Arcanist tank within my dungeon group, so if you want to see this build in action, make sure you check out my Twitch streams as we go into the Necrom chapter. I'm going to be playing this quite a lot. I'm going to be getting mine leveled out straight away. I'm going to be playing it a lot in dungeon content especially, so that's going to be really, really fun. If you've got any questions, make sure you check out the Tank Club Discord, and for all builds and information about the Elder Scrolls Online tanking, check out thetankclub.com. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye for now.